In this lesson, we will further examine how to pace yourself through the ACT exam with particular focus on how and when to skip difficult questions, if necessary, so you spend the bulk of your time correctly answering as many questions as possible. As we discussed in our other lesson on pacing, your goal on the ACT is to earn the highest score possible by correctly answering as many questions as you can. Like most students, it's very unlikely you'll be able to correctly answer each question on the test. For that reason, it's important you dedicate most of your limited time to those questions that you have the greatest likelihood of answering correctly. In the pacing lesson, we talked about how to properly pace yourself through each section of the exam. In this lesson, we'll focus on some of the tricks and tips that will help you do that effectively. All right, let's start by reviewing some of the time restraints of the exam. Remember, each section of the test gives you a different amount of time to answer a different number of questions. As a result, in the English section, you have about 30 seconds on average to answer each question after you read the passage. In math, you have about 1 minute per question. In reading, you again have about 30 seconds on average to answer each question after you read the passage. And in science, also an average of 30 seconds per question after reading the passage or examining the tables, graphs, or figures they provide you. Notice I am stressing an average of 30 seconds or a minute to answer these questions. What you need to understand is that you will spend perhaps as little as 10 seconds on some questions and perhaps as much as a minute or more on others. That's okay, so long as in the end you are answering the question correctly. What isn't okay is spending too much time on a question that you're likely to get wrong anyway. You have to budget your time on each question, and the key to doing this is to quickly assess your chances of answering a question correctly and then dedicating as much or as little time to that question as it deserves. You can place each question on the exam into one of 3 categories based on your own comfort level with that question. The first category would be those questions that you feel rather comfortable answering right away. Let's call those sure things. As you read through a question and you feel pretty good that it is something you can handle without too much investment of time, go ahead and answer it right away. Hopefully there's lots of these. But more importantly, these should be the questions that you are almost certain to get right. Let's look at this sample question from math. The absolute value of 10 minus 4 minus the absolute value of 4 minus 10 equals. Now, as you read the question, let's say that in your head you're thinking, yes, absolute value. I majored in absolute value. Great, it's a sure thing. Go ahead and quickly find the correct answer and mark it in the answer booklet. How long did that take? 10 seconds? That would be far less than the 1 minute per question that you average on the math section. And now you've put a lot of time in the bank, so to speak, for later questions. The next category, however, is the complete opposite of sure things. This category would be those questions that you know right away you are likely to get wrong. Let's call these long shots. You know better than anyone what you know and what you don't. As you read through a question, the instant you realize, uh-oh, I have no clue about this, you must stop. You might come to that realization as soon as you begin to read the question, or perhaps a bit later when trying to eliminate some of the choices. But, and I want to repeat this, as soon as you realize you are not likely to get this question right, you must stop and move on. In our earlier sample question about absolute value, we talked about how sure things enable you to deposit extra time in some sort of time bank. Well, the last thing you want to do is squander that extra time on a question you know is likely to end with a wrong answer. To invest any additional time would be counterproductive. As soon as you realize a question is a long shot, put a big X next to that question in the test booklet. Don't be afraid to do this. That X will serve as your reminder that this is a long shot. And while you will still ultimately offer a guess for that question, because remember, there's no penalty for guessing on the ACT, that question is now your lowest priority on this section of the exam. The third and final category is somewhere between sure things and long shots. These are those questions that you cannot confidently answer correctly right away, but with an investment of time, you likely can work your way to the best answer. We'll call these possibles. If you haven't already realized this, these are the questions you've been banking all that extra time for. These are the questions that you can get right, but it's just going to require an investment of time. Once again, you need to make this assessment right away. As you begin to read a question, you should almost instantly recognize if it's a long shot. If it is, you're drawing that big X and moving on. But if you didn't rule it out and you're proceeding further with the question, hopefully using the process of elimination to reduce some of your choices, you need to make a decision at some point whether this question can be answered now or if you need to come back to it. Basically, if you feel pretty good about it, or if you've narrowed the choices to 2, then you should probably proceed now and choose an answer. But if you start to sense that this question is going to require a lot of thought or effort, and you still have several more questions to get through, it's probably wise to stop now and plan to return to it later. Once you've made that decision, put a big question mark next to that question in your answer booklet. That question mark will serve as a reminder that this is one you can get, and therefore, once you've made it all the way through this part of the test, you should come back to these questions first. Now, ideally, you are answering as many of the questions as you can the first time through, but skipping over the more difficult ones is an important part of earning the best possible score. If it helps, consider this analogy of a tomato farmer. A tomato farmer wants his plants to produce as many tomatoes as possible, just like you want to answer as many questions correctly as you can on the ACT. But if the farmer only has 1 bucket of water to use among his 3 tomato plants, he'll have some decisions to make. If one of his plants is strong and producing many tomatoes already, he would probably give it a small drink of water, confident in the likelihood it will continue to produce. But if his next plant is dry and brittle, showing no signs of producing tomatoes at all, perhaps it's barely alive, he would most likely not waste any water on it. In his mind, that would be a waste of precious water. But if his last plant shows signs of life and he is certain that a substantial amount of water will help it grow healthy and productive, he would likely give it as much water as it needs. On the ACT exam, you need to see time the way the farmer sees water. Give the sure things just a little bit of time. You should be confident you'll get those right. Don't give much, if any, time at all to the long shots. That time would be better spent on other questions. And finally, use the time you still have on the possibles. With that investment of time, you should be able to get those right. Okay, let's recap some of the key ideas about this lesson. First, as you read each question, you need to make a quick decision about your chances of answering it correctly. If you think you've got it, go ahead and answer it. If you think you have no chance, mark it with an X and move on. And lastly, if you think you can get it, but it's going to take some time, label it with a question mark and then move on. Second, do not hesitate to mark up your answer booklet. Use X's and question marks, but also underline or circle key words and always cross out the choices you've eliminated. If you have to come back to a question later on, these notations will help you pick up right where you left off. Next, when you do finish a section and start to come back to the questions you've skipped, always revisit them in this order. First, start with the possibles, the ones you've labeled with a question mark. These are the ones you have a good shot at getting right. Then, if you still have time, go to the long shots, the ones you marked with an X. By doing it in this order, you are investing more time in the possibles, those questions you have the best chance of answering correctly. If you never get back to the long shots, I guess you can take some comfort in the fact that you probably weren't going to get those right anyway. But that said, try to answer every question on the test, even if you are only guessing or picking your favorite letter. Remember, there's no penalty for guessing on the ACT exam. All right, if you begin to prioritize the questions on the ACT exam, as we've discussed in this lesson, you can be sure of 2 things: that you'll pace yourself effectively through each section and that you will earn the highest score you can.